I want now to describe another way of doing tests, and this is called the unit test module. So you can see that the files that I have are essentially the same as before. I have person.py, roadtrip.py, and vehicle.py. I haven't changed those in any way that changes the way they act. I haven't changed them at all, actually. And then there is also a file called testsvehicle.py. So this is only meant to test the functionality tied to the vehicle. And you can see it's a separate file, and it doesn't interfere with the code that is actually running otherwise. So what does this file consist of? Well, it's on the left here, and you can see that I import a unit test module. And I define some things that are necessary so that I can run my tests. So essentially some people that I'll need so I can populate my vehicles. And at the end, I have some code here that is only executed when I run from the command line this file. And this just runs unittest.main with some verbosity level. And the buffer here kills the output. So basically, if I run python testvehicle.py, this will run a bunch of tests, and it tells me which tests it has run and which are okay. So it ran 11 tests in 0.22 seconds. So if I do a little change here to Froho, let's say, so one of the tests should fail. And it tells me that there is an assertion, Frodo is not equal to Froho, and it tells me on top of it the output that happens during the test, so I can actually judge what went wrong. So how does that work? How does this whole thing work? Well, I'm importing the unit test module, and as part of the unit test module comes a unittest.testCase, which is a class. So the way the unit test module works, like many other modules, is that it provides some base classes that have a lot of methods associated to them, and it expects you to subclass this base class to create objects that then have very nice behavior tied to that module. So in this case, we're subclassing unittest.testCase with this empty submarine class, and this empty submarine class will have a bunch of tests that are tied to an empty submarine. For instance, can you drive the empty submarine if there is no driver? Can you ask the submarine to drive for 20 kilometers if there are no driver? Can you take the wheel? Can you make someone take the wheel if that person has a license? Can you make someone take the wheel if that someone doesn't have a license? Can you make two people swap the wheel? So how does this work? Well, it works by having another method called the setup method, and this name you can't choose. And this setup method creates some objects that you will need later on for all the different tests that you will run. So this is the class empty submarine. So it represents all the tests that you can do from having created an empty submarine. So in the setup, I should create this empty submarine here that I define with vehicle, yellow submarine, seats for a weight of 400, etc. And then it has a bunch of methods, and each of the methods, you can't choose that either, start with test underscore, and then some very explicit and long name. So it's recommended that it's very explicit and long because this will be, you never need to type those names again. You just type it once, and then it's the longer, the more descriptive. So it's kind of writing documentation. And then this happens, remember, when you run the test. So you want this to be explicit here on the right when I run a test. Okay, so, and each time I run a test, what can I do? Well, I have self that is passed, and self is essentially the test case. And this test case here, in this case, has a submarine associated to it. And I would like to drive it for 20 kilometers. The problem is, in the setup, I have not set a driver. So this submarine should refuse to move forward by 20 kilometers. So then I use another method that's inherited from test case. I'll use the method assert equal that will assert that two values are equal, whether the distance covered by the submarine is equal to 0 or not. So this should be equal to 0. And if it is, the test will succeed. If it fails, then if it's not equal to 0, then the test will fail. Similarly, if John wants to take the wheel because John has a license, John is allowed, so there should be a driver. Well, if Ringo wants to take the wheel, then this should not be allowed, so there should be non-driver afterwards. If John takes the wheel and then George takes the wheel, then the driver should be George. So you see, I can starting from one setup, define many tests fairly easily. And this, you can define very rich tests. And you can see that quite quickly, actually, you can test more things this way than with the doc tests. And especially if the setup is very complicated, you need to read into a file, you need to connect to a database, whatever it is. So here, that was one setup, one kind of test case. Here's another test case. It's the test case where I actually have a driver. So I define a barge first, and then I make Gandalf take the wheel. And remember, all those people are defined at the very beginning because I know I'll use them in all the different test cases. And then I decide whether I can load people into the barge, whether I can unload some people and then reload more, and whether I can load 2 people in succession, and whether I can load 2 people at once, and whether I can load too many people more than what the barge actually seats. So I'm making sure that here, for instance, if I load Frodo, Bond, and Bond Girl into the barge led by Gandalf, the last one is refused. Okay, and similarly, this is now what happens when a car has been already loaded with people and driven for a while. Then what happens with your, if you want to drive more, is the tank content exactly right? If you drive too much, will that be refused? So the tank content does not change, the distance covered does not change, etc., etc. So you can read every one of those little tests as little scenarios that will explain what is supposed to happen. So it's kind of serves also as documentation, but more importantly, generates automatically test cases that you can test very easily thanks to the unit test package. So again, this was enabled by adding at the bottom this unittest.main that is only run if you run the module itself with a certain verbosity level, and this buffer here equals true redirects all the output from, all those statements here print something like Gandalf is getting on and Bond Girls it's taking the wheel, etc. And with buffer equals true, this is not printed. And this means I have a nice output here with all the succeeding tests, except that the output is actually printed if the test fails. So this is what you see here. Okay, so this is thanks to this little call here to unittest.main, but you could also use unittest directly from the command line, a bit like you could for doc test. So you run Python -m to take the module in, to import the module, and then you can -m unittest, and then -v for verbosity, and then the name of the module. So this would run all of them, and I'm still failing one because I still have not saved this file. So I save that file now, and then I run it, and you see that all the tests are okay. And I'm in verbose mode, so that's why everything prints. So if I don't print, I print less without the -v. I can also print a specific class, so I can do dot full vehicle, and this tests the test associated to this class, right? So it only does 2 of them. And finally, I can do I can test just a specific test, and this is especially relevant if some of your tests take a long time. And when I do this, I see that I run just one test here in almost no time. Okay, so again, this unit testing takes some time to set up, but it's supposed to help you maintain usable code in good condition. And also, some people use it for development because they create the test first and make sure that then their code satisfies the tests.